Director Wray, earlier this year, I sent the FBI 2 letters seeking additional information about news reports that the agency, the Bureau, had opened a counterintelligence investigation of the president following the exercise of the president's constitutional prerogatives to direct foreign policy and otherwise oversee the executive branch. I did not receive a response to those letters beyond a form letter acknowledging receipts. And since I have you here and I have you under oath, let me just ask you what I want to know. To your knowledge, has the FBI ever launched a counterintelligence investigation of another president in American history?
I don't know the answer to that question.
So that it would be no then, since it's to your knowledge. Is that right? It's fair to say you're not aware of one personally. That's all I'm asking.
It's fair to say that I'm not aware of one.
Is it safe then to say that, to the best of your knowledge, that such a move would be and is unprecedented?
Well, again, we've been around for 111 years, so I don't really know what is precedent or not precedent in that regard.
But you don't have any knowledge of any previous counterintelligence investigation of a sitting president being
Not
launched?
sitting here at this moment.
Would it be unusual for FBI agents to hide the existence and results of an investigation from their superiors?
Certainly, in my experience, for agents to hide information from their superiors would be unusual.
What can you tell us finally about the internal investigation into the decision to launch this counterintelligence probe, where it stands, when we might hear about it, and when we might expect results?
So there are two things going on. One is the ongoing, fairly far along, I guess I would say, investigation by the Inspector General, which is somewhat related to the topic you raised. That's by the independent Inspector General over the Justice Department. And then separately, as I think has been testified to publicly, the Attorney General has asked some questions about the manner in which the investigation in question began. And we are working with him or cooperating with him to try to help him get those questions answered. But I don't think I have any kind of status update or anything like that at this point. It's very much underway.
So you're aware then, just to make sure I understand your testimony, you're aware of two different probes, if you will, two different investigations or inquiries underway that touch on this topic that we've just been discussing.
Right. There's some overlap between them probably, and they both in their own ways touch on different aspects of what you described.
And your office and the FBI as a whole is fully cooperating with both inquiries. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Let me shift gears and talk to you a little bit about Chinese espionage that others of my colleagues have asked about. And I want to ask you more specifically about Confucius Institutes, which you touched on just briefly with Senator Kennedy a moment ago. 18 months ago, when you were before the Senate Intelligence Committee, you said you were concerned about Chinese espionage at universities. It's a quote from you. You're concerned about the use of non-traditional collectors, especially in the academic setting, whether it's professors, scientists, students. You say you see it in almost every field office that the FBI has around the country, and you went on to say the Chinese are exploiting the very open research and development environment that we have, and you've reiterated those concerns here this morning. Do you continue to consider Chinese espionage activities focused on research and IP theft to be a serious threat? I mean, you see that as continuing to be an ongoing threat?
Very much so. I think an awful lot of the most sensitive research that is conducted across either military or dual-use technologies, but also in areas like healthcare and things like that, are conducted in our leading academic institutions, and there is a fairly significant pattern of espionage that is occurring in that arena. So that's something we are concerned about.
Let me just ask you now specifically about Confucius Institutes and why you've expressed concern about them and why you answered Senator Kennedy as you did. Why should we be concerned? Why should the American public, why should, for that matter, American university college presidents be concerned about Confucius Institutes on their campuses? Can you just sort of spell that out for us?
So my answer that I just gave was more broadly about the academic sector. The Confucius Institutes are a source of concern, but we view those more as part of China's soft power strategy and influence. In other words, those offer a platform to disseminate Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party propaganda, to encourage censorship, to restrict academic freedom, et cetera. So it is an area of concern, and we are actually encouraged, somewhat similar to the answer I was giving to Senator Kennedy, by the growing number of universities in this country over the last few years that have taken steps to restrict and curtail Confucius Institutes on their campuses. I will say we're even more concerned, though, about what I would consider more traditional efforts at either cyber intrusion or espionage, both in the research facilities themselves and in the private sector, as I've testified about a little bit here today.
Just on the Confucius Institutes again for 1 minute, what would you say to a university president who's considering partnering and allowing with the Confucius Institute and allowing an institute on her campus? I mean, what considerations do you think that university president ought to have in mind?
I would think a university president ought to do an awful lot of homework, and we'd be happy to have the local field office sit down with them to talk to them about what we know that can be shared about Confucius Institutes so that they can make a thoughtful decision themselves about whether it's something they really want to have on their campus.
On the more, to use your phrase, more traditional forms of espionage that the Chinese government and military is employing, do you think it's time for new legislation to help secure and protect our universities from that kind of espionage? Are there tools that we could give you that you think would be beneficial?
Well, I don't know that I have a specific legislative proposal, but I do think that the level of awareness that is starting to increase in this country, including in the academic sector, and of course, you and your colleagues have played an important role in helping raise awareness, I think is positive, and I think it's time for a national conversation about how we can all play our respective roles in helping to protect the country.
I've introduced legislation that would require students, graduate students, or researchers from China and several other countries that we know engage in espionage activity to get an additional screening by the Department of Homeland Security if they are applying to work on a research project that involves either classified information or high risk security information as designated by the department. Now, I'm not asking you to endorse that, but are those kinds of additional screenings, background checks for folks who come from countries who have a history of espionage and who want to work on projects that are sensitive or classified, is that the kind of thing that you think we should be concerned about, looking for ways to protect?
Well, as you say, I haven't reviewed the specific legislation, but I think as a general rule, both making sure that universities, especially some of our universities that are leaders in science and technology, really know who it is they're bringing in. So that's the who on the one hand. And then on the what, on the other side, what information are they actually giving those people the ability to work on? Not all information and research is created alike, just like not all visitors are created alike in terms of the potential threat that it presents to our national security.